Welcome everybody to episode 12 of Cubicle Lift, a big honest conversation on workplace mental health. My name is Josh Rivedal. I am one of the founders and co-hosts. My other one is Efrem Epstein. You know the both of us. I'm with the Impossible Project. F can tell you a little bit about himself. I'm a survivor of suicide loss. My dad and my granddad, I live with two mental illnesses, depression and anxiety. I have a big insatiable curiosity around mental health and big conversations in all its forms. Today is going to be a big, giant episode. We usually have 2 to 3 guests on every episode. We have 5. We're doing this episode on fitness and mental health, a huge part of the conversation. And we are recording on Sunday. And that's the last time I'm going to ever speak in that voice. But I'm going to kick it over to Efrem, who is going to have some interesting things to say, introduce himself, and then we're going to meet our guests. Thanks.
Oh, pressure. Interesting. Josh and I were talking about doing an episode about mental health and fitness even before the Olympics. And now in the aftermath of the Olympics and some things we're seeing about the US Open, about concerns they have, which I think we're going to address both of them in the questions. We thought this episode is very, very timely. And we wanted to make the most robust conversation that we can, which is why we really supersized this episode. And luckily, we got so many amazing guests here. So we just said we just cannot make this episode too good. So we invited a bunch of amazing people to be on. And yeah, I'm going to introduce them. Oh, by the way, my name is F. Epstein, and if you're watching, you know what I do. I'm a 501c3 founder. I'm on the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention's Faith Communities Task Force. And, I've had a long interest in mental health in the workplace and mental health in general. And the first guest I'm going to introduce is somebody that you're probably already familiar with if you've watched some of our earlier episodes. She was actually on the one episode that I was not on, but I've known her for a while, and I've gotten to work with her on so many other amazing cases. Say hello again to Elana Premack Sandler, and she actually wrote a piece of Psychology Today about mental health and Olympics that we're going to talk a little bit. Elana, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Just to add a little bit to what you shared, I've been writing a blog at Psychology Today for over 12 years, and it's focused on suicide prevention, and it's been really interesting to see over that time how much the topic of mental health has shifted to be so much more central in sort of our bigger culture. So I live outside Washington, D.C., and I am also an associate professor of practice at Simmons University School of Social Work and a therapist. Glad to be here.
And she's an all-around amazing person too. Although I'm also going to say that about probably everybody else on here. Everybody here is an amazing person. And this next person, I actually have a funny story where I learned what an amazing person he was. Jeremy Greenberg, who, among other things, he founded a product that was actually athletes used called Flight Fitness. And he's done a lot of other interesting things. I'll tell you where I met him. I met him at an Active Minds fundraiser. If you watched past episodes, you probably are familiar with Allison Malman, the founder of Active Minds, who was a wonderful guest on a previous episode. So Jeremy and I are actually at a fundraiser for Active Minds. It's a casino fundraiser. We don't know each other. I know virtually nobody there, but I wind up at a poker tables, because where else are you going to be at a casino fundraiser? And I know I was there, but everybody's really trying to be friendly. And Jeremy is the person. Who is Jeremy? Jeremy's the person who places bets for people he doesn't know at a poker table at a casino fundraiser. You say, who does that? Jeremy does that. And that is basically the type of person that Jeremy is. So Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Efrem. I appreciate that. Definitely humbled to be here with all of you, and glad to join the conversation. Just as quick background, I now am a vice president at DraftKings, sports entertainment technology company, and I'm on a board of nonprofit I'll call Community Access, which is a great organization in New York City that supports folks with mental health concerns and underprivileged folks that need housing, So they actually build housing and support folks through that, but also have a variety of different programs. So really, really happy to be here and be part of the conversation.
Thank you. Welcome, Jeremy. Joanna, I've known her. I think we concluded we've known each other now for about 6 years, and she's very involved in the New York startup community. And another interesting about her, she boxes. I mean, she may not look like a boxer, but she boxes. And Joanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Super pumped to be in a group of really inspiring people. Just a little bit about me. I'm a revenue growth strategist. I've been working with early stage startups from as long as I can remember. I am also the co-founder of Atom. And what Atom is, it's a fitness management platform that really focuses on helping influencers monetize their content. And yeah, I'm an amateur boxer, been boxing for about 3 years, had my first competition right before COVID. I won't publicly tell you guys how it went, but looking forward to my next fight over the next 6 months. So very, very excited to be here, guys.
Very excited to have you. And Lynette, I actually know you through Joanna. So welcome to Cubicle Lift.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. Super excited to connect more with you, Efrem. And my background quickly, I'm co-founder with Joanna on Atom. It's a fitness management platform. And in addition to that, I have a strong background. I have a consulting firm, and I've been helping startups build their tech for over 10 years. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super pumped to be here.
Super pumped to have you. And then last, but certainly not least, last because your last name is last, but definitely not least, a wonderful human being, Josh Walfish, who this is my first time. I know we spoke on my phone, but my first time actually speaking with you face to face since I think 4 years ago, when you, myself, Elana, and I think about 4 or 5 other people walked together in the 2017 AFSP overnight walk in DC, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention overnight walk in DC. You have, among other things, been a sports writer, been a sports reporter, I believe, recently covering Division I basketball. And you and I got to talking because you have also a unique overlap between sports and mental health. And welcome, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, F and Josh. As I've just mentioned, I have been a sports journalist for a decade. Then the pandemic hit, and that caused a whole rift of issues. And I'll actually be starting a master's program in sports administration coming up this fall. So definitely very interested in the sports, and very similar to Josh. I suffer from depression and anxiety as well, and I'm a survivor of a suicide attempt. So definitely the intersection between sports and mental health is something that's very very interesting to me and very personal to me.
Outstanding. Thank you, Josh. Thanks everybody. Wow. This first time, other than Lana and F, this is really the first time I'm interacting with everybody, and it's just incredibly dynamic people in a lot of different ways. So it's nice that we're going to get to have this conversation. 2 things. 1, F, I forgot your adjective. We're going to go, you're delightful today. We forgot about that. Okay. I've never used that before. 2, I also have a slight connection with fitness, and then we'll dive into the questions. I practice Taekwondo, and I'm training for black belt. And so we're doing a little boxing. So Joanna, I'm like, oh man, how can I fit in a parry reference? But I can't, so it's not gonna happen. But that's the only boxing word I could think of at the time. But yeah, super, super cool. Everybody, what you got going on and everything you're bringing to the table. Let's kick off with some questions. Elana wrote this really great article. It's okay not to be okay. And it revolves around Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, and just them setting boundaries, and sort of how that, I think that crisscrosses our conversation. I mean, that's their workplace, right? That's their workplace. And then we have, I just remember hearing a lot of the talk, the surrounding talk, and there's some for, some against, but there were people that totally didn't understand that boundary that they set, and just some of the repercussions of them being human beings, and being allowed to have the experience that they were having. Elana, would you just maybe dive into a little bit of what prompted you to write that article, and then maybe we'll have some people chime in and chat about what that means to them and the broader conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I had started writing a little bit about Simone Biles when she first sort of made this decision to pull back from her Olympic competition. And I had been working on it. And then things got in the way. I put it away. And I woke up one morning and my alerts on my phone, like my little news alert, said Simone Biles took bronze. And like as she re-entered competition. And I was like, even as I'm repeating it, I have chills because it was so amazing to think like this. For 1 week ago, she's like, I cannot do this. And then she comes back to perform at like what her best was in that moment, which was not who everyone wanted her to be, this, gold medalist, but who she could be like at that time. And I was just so wowed by her courage, both to pull back and to set the limit, but then also to re-enter and say, I can do it, but I can do it this way. Like, this is the way I'm going to do it. And I'd also been just so impressed by Naomi and Osaka's bravery in coming forward and just being completely out there with what she needed. And I think that for both of these women, the real strength that they have like outside as athletes, but also so clearly that they have been able to develop inside. And what resonated with me, it was interesting to hear you say, Josh, like the reactions that they received, like, how dare you, like ask for what you need. And I thought of all these people I know who have not felt that they can ask for what they need, even when it comes to like their own survival. So, mental survival, emotional, spiritual, physical survival. And so all of it sort of came together for me in their stories. And I felt like very inspired to write something and just try to put those thoughts together. So happy to hear other folks' ideas about that. Or relate.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out of turn. I'm gonna do something unusual, and I'm gonna go first, and then I'll because I just want to share two quick takeaways. And one is setting boundaries is really important, whether that's with an employer, a boss, or a client. Like, I've had to set boundaries with clients before and say, hey, like, I don't think this is a good fit. Like, here's your money back, and whatever I can do to help, but I gotta go. Like, in my own way, not like that per se, but just like I have to set this boundary, right? And the other piece is, right, so boundary, and the other piece is sometimes the exercise isn't to win, the exercise is to show up, right? And we forget that. Like, I'm actively participating in the day. I'm actively participating at the cubicle, even if it's at 70%. But sometimes it's that, and the fact that Miss Biles won the bronze. I mean, that's frosting, right? That's extra. But the fact that she showed up, I think is just, to me, is the exercise. So those are my two takeaways, and I'd love for other people to dive in.
I can chime in on that too. I can definitely empathize with the idea of saying, when boundaries are crossed, whether it's from a client, a friend, whatever that relationship is, it's actually checking in with yourself and this is from a personal standpoint, what's working here, what's not working here, are my boundaries being respected? And then from another perspective too, just to kind of build on what you mentioned in your article, I think it's really interesting to think about asking for what we need and also what are we, or who are we living for sometimes? And I think that Simone touched on a little bit of that, going through her journey of feeling the weight of expectation and what is the purpose. So in the purpose of when I'm lifting, or in the purpose of when I'm in the ring, or when I'm on the rings, right? It's really interesting take. I can't even imagine the weight that she was under to kind of come to those conclusions. But wow, it does give me chills as well, just to think about that. But
and the other thing is, it's not even the pressure. I mean, and that's part of it, and that's obviously something that Simone Biles has to deal with, just kind of being as remarkable as she is at gymnastics. When you think about what it is she has to do. She, you know, I think of the vault, which is, I believe, the event she was on when she kind of was like, I don't feel comfortable and safe doing this. You're running down a runway, you're going off a springboard, you're flipping yourself around, and then you're having to land on your feet. And like, if for any split second lose track of where you are in the air, lose track of, you know, which way is up, which way is down, it could be serious injury. And I'm an Olympics nerd, so I was reading about a Russian, or I guess at the time Soviet gymnast ahead of the 1980 Summer Olympics, and you know, she is the great Soviet hope in the women's gymnastics, to be an all-around champion and whatnot. And she was trying this trick, and she had told her coaches a couple times, like, I don't feel comfortable trying this trick today. I don't feel comfortable trying this trick today. And they're like, no, it's fine. It's fine. She misjudges herself. She breaks her neck. She's paralyzed. She doesn't get to compete again in the Olympics. Like, that's the sort of, you know, life and, not really life and death, but, you know, life for serious injury situation that Simone Biles is in. So if she doesn't feel comfortable to flip herself around in the air, like, who are we, you know, the average American on the couch, to say, oh, you know, it's all mental. She could have just kind of ran over. It's like, okay, you go do what she did and not hurt yourself badly. Like, if you could do that, you know, plaudits to you, all the applause. But like, it's not even the mental pressure, it's the physical actions that Simone Biles take that, like, sometimes just get taken for granted just because of how good she is.
And Josh, you bring up a very important part, and that's the negativity. I was personally surprised and shocked about the negative feedback that this story received. And you know, since then I've had numerous conversations with a lot of people, and I think people saw it as two things: a sign of a lack of commitment and a sign of weakness, right? But I think the whole concept of putting up boundaries does the opposite. To me, it shows strength, right? To me, it shows that you're committed to coming back, but you want to do it properly, right? So I don't know if anybody here was surprised as I was, but I was surprised about the negative feedback from all of this.
I wish I could say I was surprised with the negative feedback. Like, and it's a situation of, you know, kind of being around sports as, you know, from a journalist perspective, and having the misfortune, however you want to describe it, of covering a lot of teams that were just not very good. You know, there's a lot of negativity in the sports world because we just assume that these people are robots and can just do what they want, and, you know, have this utter control over their body because they've reached such a high level, whether it be playing Division I basketball or football, or making it to the pros or to the Olympics. We just assume, well, okay, if they're that good, then they just have this immense control over their body. And, you know, I think, speaking to the point you made, Joanna, like, they don't have a control over their body, but what they have is they're in tune with their body. And when an athlete is in tune enough with their body to know when to set the boundaries, when they can go, when they can't go, like, that I think is the ultimate sign of strength, because that means you are really connected with who you are, both physically and mentally. And that really is the sign of an elite athlete.
I think it's true. I do think that the reality is that most of us, when I say us, like, you know, the world and the media and the public, tend to think about athletes in terms of being superhuman and therefore not being human. And so Alana's article really resonated with me because she did actually talk about the example that, Josh, you mentioned. And I believe that that woman died prematurely, potentially, like, as a result of actually the injury. So it actually was a situation of life and death, and in that case, death. And I think we often conflate um, sports sports success with basically a lack of mental health issues. So one example, and I'm a big fan of him, is Michael Jordan. Everyone says, you know, what sets Michael Jordan apart, and he's an advisor at DraftKings, and he's probably one of my favorite athletes of all time in terms of his work on the basketball court. You know, arguably he is the best at what he did than anyone has ever been at their job, right? I mean, he's amazing talent, and a lot of people would say, you know, what sets him apart is mental fortitude. And I think there's a difference between by the way, this is a person whose father passed away and left the sport for a couple of years, came back, and when he won a championship was crying. You know, he was showing his emotions. So it's not like he lacked emotions, he lacked being human. But I think a lot of people conflate the two things, where it's like, in order to be a really good athlete and a good performer, you need to put a lot of those emotions aside. And I think, truthfully, I think the way that even Michael Jordan performed really well is he actually took his emotions and bottled them up, and sorry, not bottled them, he focused them in ways that would motivate himself. And I think a lot of athletes have to do that in different ways, and that's sort of underappreciated. So I think when we think about athletes, yeah, we do think about them as like robots and superhumans, but the reality is they're humans. There's a mental health component to their lives, just like all of our lives. And we put them up on pedestals, but it's easy to kind of tear them away once we realize that, you know, like a Michael Phelps is actually a human being, or a Michael Jordan, or Simone Biles, or Naomi Osaka, or really anyone. So I think that's one of the challenges to work on here.
Yeah, I'm with everybody that there was obviously way too much negativity, and I would like to have seen a lot less. At the same time, and maybe this is going to be looking through overly rosy colored glasses, I actually was very heartened by the support they got. It was nowhere near universal, and I also realized that my network is not necessarily representative of the general public. But I also think that even within my network, I don't think that the overall supportive vibe I got from this afterwards would have been that way 30 years ago. So I think maybe there's some optimism that there is some change there. We still have a long ways to go. And there are many reasons why I think this is an important conversation, but not the least of which being that the conversation about what's going on with sports very much mirrors what's going to go on in other professions. And a book, I'm not somebody that reads, that if I read a book, am usually too anxious to read it again. But a book that I am rereading now, that I read for the first time sometime in the 90s, is Liar's Poker. If people are familiar with the book, it's basically Michael Lewis giving his firsthand account of what it's like to work on Wall Street in I think in the late 80s, and it in many ways was considered very comical at the time. And you know, you read it now, you read it and say, wow, that was really atrocious. Now, it was really atrocious how toxic it was, but you also say, listen, even still we got a long ways to go, thank God now that tide of toxicity has kind of lessened a little bit from where we were in the late 80s, in the early 90s.
The way that we're treating athletes in at least in the United States, maybe you see it in football, soccer, in soccer heavy countries and other sports, just that we see people as a commodity and not as a human being. And I think that permeates not every place of the US marketplace, but we see people as units of production rather than someone with a story, right? So if we can somehow, I'm not against capitalism, but I think if we can merge the two together and have some sort of more humane, like, yeah, people are units of production, but they have, they're human beings, and they're not superhuman, and you can't go 16 hours a day, just like you can't spin in the middle of the air 6 times without feeling good about it and doing it in advance. I still haven't gotten to one yet. So, a pirouette game is soft. But I want to kind of merge into another question, because I'm hearing a lot of it's all in your head. It's mental, and people have been saying it to make a point, right? But that's where we live. That's where all of us live. We all live in our heads. So we've got to have a better mental game, right? And so so we're hearing, and I've heard of this term maybe for 10 years, and you're hearing a little more, but it's still not like this idea of a sports psychologist, right? Who, why is this even a thing? Why is it important? What are some parallels? What do they do? What should they be doing? Is this necessary? Like, let's just, I mean, I kind of have my feelings about it, but I kind of want to hear from the gallery.
I guess I'll kind of follow it up. Like, what do you mean? I guess when you ask, sort of, is it sort of necessary? Because I think, you know, as we've kind of touched upon, like, to understand that the psyche of an athlete is a very, very difficult endeavor, and unless you've kind of been at that level or immerse yourself at that level of athletics, like, you don't really understand. Like, they are human and they suffer. You know, athletes have all the same problems that humans have, you know, especially what I'll call sort of the fringe people, you know, the fringe professional athletes, those that are towards the bottom of a roster and may get cut, may not get cut. Like, you know, minor league players are, you know, we've seen over this past couple summers, sort of the issues coming out of minor league baseball and the fact that they don't really get paid a living wage, and a lot of them have off-season jobs as well. So, like, they all have human problems, but on top of that, they have the problems of, you know, sort of workplace stress, and it's just different. Like, it is far different to have workplace stress when your workplace is an entertainment venue, whether that be being an actor, you know, in movies or a TV show, or being a professional athlete. Like, that's just a different type of vibe. And so, you know, to have someone who specializes in that sort of psyche, I think, is very important. And what I'm actually going to be very curious to see is, I don't know how many of you guys watched the show Ted Lasso on Apple TV Plus, but it kind of took off, I guess last summer, and really kind of in the fall, when people were like, oh wait, this show is not just some kind of hokey show based off of a hokey commercial that was on, you know, 7 years ago when NBC got the Premier League rights, and, you know, it deservedly is up for like 20 Emmy Awards or something. But, like, the whole second season revolves around this team hiring a sports psychologist and sort of the impact she has on the team. And, you know, in talking with various college athletes and college coaches, like, the impact of sports psychology is something that is becoming more and more routine and becoming more and more necessary. Like, it's almost a competitive disadvantage to not have a sports psychologist on your payroll if you're a professional sports team. It's almost becoming a competitive disadvantage to not have a sports psychologist if you're an elite golfer or tennis player or any of these sort of individual sports. So to have someone who has that intellect, has that sort of experience, and can kind of connect with them and help them overcome the challenges that come from those stresses in life, I think is absolutely vital.
And if I can speak a little bit personally, so I actually had a close friend who graduated studying sports psychology in college, and I spent some time laughing at him for it, and said, you know, saying, couldn't you be a real psychologist, and kind of giving him a lot of, you know, just bad stuff over it. But over the years, you know, I got into boxing, and nowhere near am I a professional boxer. But right before my fights, I would have to say I was the most physically ready for my fights in terms of just where I was with my weights, my strength, my footwork, my defensive skills. And it was about a week before my actual fight when my opponent decided to show up to the gym. And it was a whole nother ball game. For the next week after that, I don't think I felt that much mental anxiety, mental pressure. I thought I would have a breakdown numerous times all the way up to my fights. And the hardest part for me was not having somebody to talk to about that, right? Because the mental kind of effects of this is sometimes not even equivalent to like workplace stress. And I'd be taking some time to talk to my peers about this, saying, hey, I feel a lot of stress about this specific incident, and I don't understand, or I don't know how to kind of take it a step up. And I couldn't relate. So I feel that a part of sports psychology, the reason why it's so crucial is because of the differentiating environment. All right. You kind of need somebody who has that experience to take an athlete from step 1 to step 2 of the entire process. Not even somebody that has been there, but there's different ways of dealing with this type of stress. And it's unlike anything else that I think anybody else can experience.
Yeah, I think the reason that sports psychologists exist is because they're effective, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we don't have we don't have as many other industry. You don't have like a teacher psychologist. You don't have a lawyer psychologist. You have therapists and psychologists that work with these professions, but it just tells you how integral it is, because I think fundamentally there are, it's very intertwined, the cognitive dynamics involved with sports, the proprioception in terms of body position, and our brain and our body are very interconnected. And I think people start to realize that, over the last 100 years or so, and it's becoming more and more common. I don't think, by the way, the reason that sports psychologists are becoming more prevalent, if they are, or just the fact that they're prevalent, is to make people feel better. I think the reason is to improve performance. I think if it was about making people feel better, I don't think it would be its own category, because otherwise, I mean, like I said, there are many more doctors or lawyers or other teachers. I think people have proven that it's effective, and that you can have an edge when you engage in this type of support. There's something fundamentally different when you're using your body and you're competing that way, as opposed to, purely, using your mind. And, it's different typing in a keyboard, or, presenting or public speaking, than you jumping into a boxing ring or an athlete at a free throw line, with millions of people watching them to hit, a game tying free throw or whatever it may be. But I do think it is sort of a capitalistic rationale for why that job exists, as opposed to, purely one trying to make people feel better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I'm not sure. This is a question that's been in my head, and listening to this conversation, I think that I'm getting some answers that I've long struggled about why we need something like a sports psychologist. And I think all the points here are well taken, in that, listen, I mean, most of us are at jobs where we're going to be stressed at times, maybe stressed a lot. We're often going to be at desks where we're at desk. We need a moment, or we need to clear our head on things. But they have to do that with sometimes 50,000 people or more watching them, judging them, cheering them, booing them. One quick anecdote: there was a catcher, late 80s, early 90s, probably a career, I think he was a career backup catcher. His name was Mackie Sasser, if anyone remembers his name. I think he backed up Gary Carter for a number of years on the Mets. And I remember he developed one year just a block in terms of throwing the ball back to the pitcher, that it took him like several times to do it. And meanwhile, he could very clearly throw to second base if somebody was stealing, but just the throw back to the pitcher. Remember, it was one of the things where it took him sometimes 7 throws to be back, and I remember the fans would often boo him, and so I think that there are definitely stresses there that are unique, and maybe that's part of the answer to the question.
And I have to add onto that a little bit. You talked about sort of everyone booing and, kind of the fans part of it. Let's also, and I'll be a little bit biased when I say this, but there's also the media component of it. And this kind of ties into Naomi Osaka as well, where it's not just the fans, right? I'm not going to say it's easy, because it clearly isn't, but like the fans, you are just sort of almost this this kind of just block of people, and like the chances of you running face to face in with one of the 50,000 fans after you miss a game tying free throw is very slim. But you're talking about 15 and 20 minutes after you miss a game tying free throw, you have a bunch of people coming into a locker room and asking you, what was going through your mind when you were taking that free throw, and what's your mindset, because this is a team that has lost, whatever, 10 straight games, and they have a chance to break the losing streak, and you missed the key shot, and what does that do for morale? It's easy. I find it, I think it's a little bit easier to sort of overcome the disappointment of a loss or disappointment of missing the shot when the only people you feel like you're disappointing are just kind of these faceless people in a crowd, versus when, within 15 minutes, you have people shoving microphones in your face, asking you about probably the worst part of your day, or maybe even the worst moment of your career, if you're fortunate enough there in the middle. And like, that's the thing that, I'm kind of going back to Naomi and Osaka for a second, like, that's the part that conflicted me, is there is this sense of, right or not, part of the responsibility of being a professional athlete, particularly a professional athlete as talented and as high ranked as Naomi Osaka, is win or lose talking to the media. And believe me, I've covered enough losing teams to know it is not easy to talk to athletes after they've lost a game that they care deeply about. It is far easier and far more enjoyable when you're talking with people who have won and are a little bit happier. And so from one hand, I look at Naomi Osaka and I'm like, fortunate or not, that's part of your job. And like, I don't feel like you just, I feel like if you can't do that part of your job, then you shouldn't be playing in the tennis tournament. And I completely respect I respect her decision to say, I'm not going to play in the French Open because I'm not comfortable talking with the media right now, or, that's causing me too much stress. That's fine. I had a slightly bigger issue with, I'm going to play in this tournament, but I'm going to abdicate my responsibilities in this one area. And again, she got fined, and if she's okay with losing that money and paying that fine, that's great. But I struggled with my reaction to that decision, because talking with the media is part of her job, and whether or not sports psychologists could have helped in that situation in terms of bridging that gap with the media.
If I can just chime in here, I know that there are a lot of different comments on this, and I think it gets back to the why on the sports psychologist. And I definitely can't answer that, as I'm not a professional athlete, or I've never actually needed a sports psychologist. But I do participate in the psychology, like in terms of therapy, and I think that there are various reasons that we have therapists, whether it's personally or in business and coaching. And I think a lot of, at least from perhaps a sports psychologist standpoint, or even looking at it from the lens of an athlete, which I'm not, but when you're in the gym or in the ring or on the golf course, right? There's heavy psychology from a golfing perspective. It's a lot about performance, I think, from the perspective of, I have to do X, Y, Z. And I think that from a performance standpoint, you're looking at this and you're saying, these are measurable impacts, right? So they're measurable. You either get a W or a loss, right? And I think that sometimes they're performance anxiety or performance impact in some way, and those are heavy triggers from a psychology standpoint, I think, I mean, I'll pass that to someone else here that's more versed in this, but performance triggers, I mean, those can lead into shame avoidance and other things. I think that the heaviness of that, when a lot of times your performance defines your value in some ways, that's super heavy. And I think that as you dig deeper into why a sports psychologist, and I can't answer that for sure, but when you really, peel the onion back, it's kind of like, well, you're trying to improve your performance perhaps, or remove some blockers. We know that there's a definite cognitive brain coordination with your body. So your mental well-being impacts your ability to hit the ball or make a free throw. And I think that performance is, what happens if I don't perform? And then that's that reverse, that psychology that gets deeper in, and then it from even outside of sports, there's a heavy trigger there from, am I performing well in my job? Am I performing well across the board in some way? So I think that there's some interesting questions there, and I think performing at a level of a professional athlete, only very few could even begin to understand what that looks like and what that feels like, and how do you process that. And I think that there's probably some really great sports psychologists in the field that are tackling that because of the weight of even performing off the field, right? So making sure, if that's part of my job of responding to the media, perhaps it's also that performance anxiety of being able to talk without my voice cracking because I just lost a game and I don't want to show my weakness, or I'm feeling emotionally stacked and I can't maintain my composure. And I think those are all things where it's like, actually, I want to cry. I want to cry in the room and with my coach, and I want to figure it out, and that's okay. I don't need to share that right after the game, perhaps. And performance really is, and I think what's interesting, and it goes into boundaries and what we're seeing, and it's back to that kind of the article they wrote, is just more on maybe I actually get to redefine my job and what I want. And I just think there's some really interesting expansion, and I think we're seeing it a lot with youth and how they approach their professions, their work, their life, and it's exciting. I mean, I'm excited for the next generation that's coming because we're seeing some really interesting changes and some actual claiming of what it is, that how much of their life that they own. Yeah.
A couple of things. I mean, just the definition back to that, and I think it was really helpful for me to hear that it's largely for the purpose of performance, right? Like it's not super altruistic. I mean, maybe on a certain level it is, but the sports psychologist is not there to perform dialectical behavioral therapy. Like that's not, maybe for some, but it's not, or CBT or EMDR or any of the other acronyms that you may or may not know or understand. But that being said, I think the fact that it is performance-based, I mean, maybe there are some that kind of dive into the layers of what's at the root, and oh, it was because when you were 7, this thing happened, and like, how are you going to work on that this week or whatever, right? But I think, seeing it as a parallel to workplace, the office space or whatever, I think that's another good reason to bring on, whether it's through teletherapy or whether it's, an in-house therapist, or whether that's having it covered by your in-house insurance plan, but just making therapy, counseling easily accessible, if for nothing else, for performance, to get the most out of your people, your air quotes commodity. I'm not, against doing good things for bad reasons. Like, let's do the good things, right? So like, let's get cooking, right? So I think this to me is a very nice metaphor to lean back into why it would be important, and why it is important to make sure that the mental well-being of your people, of your employees, is tremendously important. So.
could jump in there for a second just to, I think, connecting some of what was said before, but I really do feel like this 100% is the next issue for workplaces, and that these examples actually, like, because it pushed the mental health issue sort of into the what is your job and what is your life. And like, we're already in this sort of place where those things aren't really so neatly separated. And so, Josh, what you shared about, like, some ambivalence about Naomi Osaka's sort of saying, like, I don't want to do that part of my job. Like, that's not a part of my job I feel like I can do effectively. I think that, yes, she had tremendous privilege to be able to walk away, to pay the fine, to say, like, okay, I'm not going to. So not everybody can just walk away. But I do think that we're seeing, to Lynette's point, like a generational shift, sort of a cultural shift, where people are walking away from employers that aren't treating them with humanity because of lots of factors. But I think that there's a greater value, like a shift from valuing the company and sort of like contributing as like a good company person to like, well, I value myself more than I value this company. And so if this company doesn't value me and what I'm contributing and allow, like, supporting me to be able to contribute that, then I can take my contribution elsewhere. Or like, we're really saying, or I'm just going to do my own thing. Like, I'm going to not buy into this sort of like the way that things have always been done. And I think that's what's really interesting also about, like, thinking about Naomi Osaka as one example. Like, that was the way that things have always been done. Like, athletes have always taken press conferences right after wins or losses. And so who says that that's the way things have to, I mean, I'm so idealistic saying that, but like, maybe that isn't the way that things have to be done moving forward. Or maybe some people do that and some people don't. And that there's just an expansiveness to thinking about what's possible. And if we start thinking more about people as people rather than people as commodities, which I agree to Jeremy's point that is the purpose. Probably the roots of sports psychology was like making money, like not necessarily for the psychologists, but for the teams that are employing the psychologists. So,
I mean, to your point, Elana, I mean, I walked away from a job because of mental health and sort of the basically very, very poor morale. I mean, I was in a situation where the newspaper I was at got bought out in March, and the new owner came in and had a giant meeting with all of us and said, hey, don't worry about your jobs. Like, we're not gonna cut anybody. Like, everyone is gonna have a job at this company moving forward. And then within a month, people started losing their jobs because although they told the truth that everyone was going to have a job, what they did not say was that, oh yeah, your job is going to change a little bit, or we don't want you in this job. We're going to offer you this other job, paying you less money, and you can take it or you cannot take it. And people are like, you're telling me that you're demoting me, basically? Like, that's not good. And the morale and the environment in that workplace was just so bad that I'm like, I have to get out of here. And then I guess to your point about the press conferences, I think that the challenge that the sports media landscape and the rise and sort of the importance of mental health in athletes and their ability to kind of take control of that is, how do you connect, how do these athletes connect with their fans in a way that actually makes sense? Like, yes, I think it's easy for the athletes if they wanted to say, all right, we're still not going to talk to the media and we're going to have everything in house. And we've seen teams start to do this where they will basically hire their own reporter to cover the team, but those reporters aren't going to tell you the bad is. Like, my all-time favorite thing was think it was 5 years ago, there was a college baseball team that had a perfect game thrown against them. But if you looked at the team that lost, nowhere in the article did it say that they lost the game, that the other team threw a perfect game, or any, like, it was just like, team A had a great chance when the batter hit a line drive to the left fielder, that the left fielder made an amazing grab to catch, and like just completely, missing the entire point of the game. And so there's this balance between the athletes controlling their narrative and being able to tell their story and kind of take control of things, but also like having journalists hold people to account. Like, again, the White House, the very different sort of environment, but like there's a White House press corps to keep the president and our political leaders in check, and to respond directly to the things that they're sort of saying from the podium as their own sort of PR and sort of branding message. And it's now figuring out, I think, as you said, how do athletes control the message they send out to their fans, while also having the ability for people to hold them to account for the things they say, and not kind of let them completely control the narrative without some pushback from some, objective authority.
Like the Twitter version, like where you're just giving your own like monologue about your life and telling your autobiography, and that's not filtered and not critiqued and not, like you might have some people messaging you, but it's different for sure.
And I mean, it makes sense. And I was reading a little bit about why Osaka originally kind of said no to the press conference. And it's not that she doesn't love the press, right? It was the concept of the format of the press. And what you said to Josh, it kind of ties it in together, because I don't understand the format of the press. What does that even mean? I feel, and again, I'm not a journalist, so this is coming from kind of a different perspective, but I sometimes sit and wonder about the whole concept of journalism and where it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, to where it is right now, and the fact that the format hasn't changed. 20 years ago, there was a lot less of an ability for people to tell their own stories, right? How do you do it? Somebody had to write about you. Forward now to 2021, you can all write your own stories, right? Publish a medium, take up a Twitter. So if the way that people distribute and digest information has changed, why has journalism and the concept of press conferences have not changed? And maybe Osaka then has a good point. Press is great, but how do we change the formats, and so that it's a much better conversation? It's a bit, more peer-to-peer versus anything else.
So to answer your question, Joanna, it's a complete power grab on the sports media side of things. Like, I am not afraid to sort of admit this, like from a perspective, because one of the things that the pandemic has really challenged a lot of sports journalists with is, obviously with social distancing and whatnot, journalists are not allowed in locker rooms. Like, I'll go to the NFL as a perfect example, but in the NFL, per the sort of that's what I'm looking for. Basically, per the bargaining agreement between the Professional Writers Union and the NFL, like, players have to be available for, I think it's 30 minutes after practice, after a 20-minute cool down period. Like, players are available in the locker room, and players can sort of hide out in the training room and find out, or there's some superstar players. And I think this is sort of, where a lot of the individual sports are going to probably tend to go. Like in the NFL, the quarterback speaks 1 day a week. So that might be for different teams, Tuesday, Wednesday, wherever it may be. Quarterbacks at a podium, they speak. They don't speak again until after the game, when again they have their podium. And I think that might be where a lot of the individual sports end up going, is saying, okay, you are going to answer questions every other round until you lose. And then, for some of the higher profile athletes, like, Naomi Osaka, I think is a rough example, like you're going to have to be in sort of the main media room. But the other challenge for the individual sports is not everyone is treated equally. The issue with Naomi Osaka and I think to your point, Joanna, kind of her issue is she is such a high profile player that she has to talk after every match because people want to hear from the number 2 player in the world after every single one of her matches. If Naomi Osaka was ranked 30th in the world and she was playing on, court 17, at noon, she wouldn't have to really go into a main press conference every single time. For the most part, the journalists who would want to talk to her would go out to court 17 and they'd grab her after the match and the standard zone and all is good. But it's not, I think that needs to sort of be the changes, so to speak, is understanding that sports media has to let go of some of that power. They have to understand that they aren't entitled to go into the locker room after every practice, after every game and talk to people. But the players also have to give way of understanding, like, okay, if we're going to relent and not, or if we're going to take the concession of not allowing locker room access, like we need to make ourselves more available, whether that is once a week, twice a week, so that we can be kind of held to account for the things we say and we do on the field.
I want to bring this back because that's a lot of really great information, and
right.
I'm hearing some things from you, and I heard something from Joanna 20 years ago, right? And and you said power grab, right? And that's interesting to me, because people, the athlete doesn't exist in a silo anymore. Like, you can go on Twitter, you can go on Instagram, you can curate your own stories, you can change the narrative after that journalist asked you the question that you didn't want to answer, or that you didn't like the way they phrased it, right? So, but I almost see this like we're able to tell, like, storytelling is so important. That's a big thing of what I do, and it's important for mental health. It's important on so many levels, right? And so it feels to me like there's another parallel here, like where like the worker is starting to, I mean, we're hearing about it, right? They're getting, we're the great quit, or whatever I'm hearing it being called, right? Like, I'm quitting, I'm getting a master's in sports management, right? And I'm doing, or I'm going here, I'm changing jobs, and I'm able to tell my story through Medium or through Axios or through Twitter or through Instagram. And so the worker has, just like the athlete, just like the A-list athlete has more options, right? And we're not, so I think that's a positive, right? Like, so I just wanted to kind of summarize that a bit, because I think that's something that needs to be called into, called attention to as well. I think that's really important. So Joanna and Josh, you kind of elevated the conversation in that direction. So I think that's really interesting. And I get to summarize a little bit. There's a point that I want to make, and I just kind of want to hear some opinions. This is what we call the hearsay round. It's very new. No, the speculation round. But just the fact that the U.S. Open, right? I mean, one of the four majors has announced that it will offer mental health services to U.S. Open participants, even people on court 17, Josh. But beyond that, I think all of us here could really see that this is good news. But what do y'all think that this says or indicates about potential future trends in the field of either mental health or sports and mental health or the worker and mental health? I mean, whatever your perspective is on it.
I think it just is going back to, I think, the larger trend in the world in general, which is the elevation of mental health onto a similar playing field as physical health. Like, again, like, going back to sports psychology, like, you don't necessarily need to have a full-time sports psychologist on your team. Like, maybe, as F was saying, like, I'll keep using tennis because I can't. Like, there are some tennis players that sometimes just get into a rut when it comes to just throwing the ball up for a serve. And like, if that means that you had a rough day with throwing the ball up for the serve and being able to hit it, and you can just sit down for an hour and talk to someone about it, and kind of clear your head a little bit heading into your next match where maybe your serve is going to be a little bit more important. Like, I think that's vital. And so for me, it just seems like it's just kind of the continuation of the fact that people are realizing that mental health and physical health are one and the same, and that maybe you don't need a ice pack or a sauna or whatever to cure what is troubling you after a match to prepare you for the next match. Maybe it's just a quick 30-minute hour conversation with a trained psychologist to kind of get you into that right mindset to continue to have success in that particular tournament.
Yeah, going back to the Axios article, which we mentioned a few minutes back, to me, the idea that mental health is the next big conversation, I've been seeing it growing as a conversation now for 5-6 years. I think there have been articles that have been calling it the next big thing now for probably half a decade or so. Although now it seems like there are still articles that are saying it's the next big thing. I think that what we're seeing is that more and more people are willing to accept this next big thing because it's been in certain areas, maybe in certain cities, it's been accepted, but in certain other parts of the country, it's not. Or you've been seeing certain industries that are more willing to accept it than not. Once going back to Irish poker, it definitely was not something that would have been accepted on Wall Street back 30 years ago. One thing that and maybe this is a larger conversation, that being that as people are awakening, and among other things, I'd love to hear Elana's thoughts on this. One thing that has always, or one thing that's been concerns with me, is that it's good when people awaken to it, but then as they awaken to it and they think, oh my gosh, this is now the next big thing, are they then going to do it properly? I know that in my advocacy work, I know that Josh, Elana, we spoke about this, often people who are late to come to the game, yeah, it's great when they wake up, but then they all of a sudden saying, oh my gosh, now I'm going to do it. It's almost the equivalent of somebody who you've been trying to tell them that fire safety is important, and they've been ignoring it while everyone else is putting the fire. And now they're like, oh, I all of a sudden got fire safety is important. So now I'm gonna be the person that whenever I see a fire there, I'm gonna show up with a bucket of water, and instead of following all the directions that everybody else has been doing all along. I don't know if that analogy was great, but
well, I thought you were going to say like they're finally into fire safety, but everything around them is on fire.
Well, that too.
And I feel like that's sort of like where we actually are, which is interesting. Like, I think I have a little bit of cynicism about it. Like, as a mental health professional, it's like, awesome. Yes, we want more mental, like the integration of mental health and physical health. Like, I think that's something we in this, world have been wanting for a long time. But then I do worry that it's like a token kind of thing. It's not really it's not real. It's sort of like, here we have it, you can go. But then there's the existing stigma. So what are the stigmas that need to be brought down so that people will seek it? Like, I can't imagine, this has been an issue in the military, like to really normalize help seeking in sort of corporate cultures that don't reward that. And I even think in my own field, in higher education, like I'm trying to imagine as a manager, like I would love to have a coach I could go to after a bad game, like truly, like after a meeting or a bad like interaction, and say like, okay, I need you to talk me down, and I need you to help me go into the next one better, because right now I just want to like run screaming like away from this, and this is not a high stakes, like higher education is high stakes, but it's not professional athleticism. So I think that lots of industries could benefit, but it's sort of like, how do we then really take down the barriers for people to utilize it? because I think there's still a lot of fear around admitting, like, I'm thinking, okay, is it okay to cry at work? I don't know if it's okay to cry at work yet. Like I having done it, I'm not sure. So I think that would be a good first step. It's like, can we cry? Like, can we cry at work? Or do we have to like go and hide somewhere and say like, I'm not having feelings of self-doubt. I'm not having feelings of fear. I'm not, like, so I think there's so many more, both internal, like sort of things of self-talk that we want to do, but also like culture shifts that would really support people using it correctly.
And I think too, I mean, and just a quick note on that, it's the adoption aspect of it, and then being able to like wholly put out there, the more that other athletes start speaking about their game when it comes to, therapy or sports psychology and all of that, then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, right. And I think, we're seeing, I think sports in general, and even the sports within the sports, like NFL, I can imagine would be very different than, let's say, tennis, maybe. I don't know. And then there goes into several other aspects of like, are we speaking about, what the gender basis would be in terms of adoption and all sorts of other things. But it is a fascinating aspect, and I'm looking forward to kind of what the adoption starts to look like, because I think it's just an enrichment aspect that can go, leaps ahead for people, for athletes especially.
And I agree with Lynette. I feel like it's going to be a little bit of a domino effect of, athletes talking to athletes. And then to your points, Elana, there's a direct correlation with the marketplace, or sorry, the workplace in general. And I think it stems from COVID, right? If you kind of think about a traditional workplace environment where everybody's expected to act a certain way, be a certain way. I need to make sure that my hair is all done up and you can't see me crying. And then all of a sudden everybody's working remote and you're in your home environment. So how do you deal? All of a sudden it's potentially okay to cry because you're doing it in your bedroom. It's okay to have a bad day because, hey, I'm going to go grab a nap after this, right? So I feel that has accelerated, and that's a future trend of it's okay to talk about it, right? And then another kind of future trend that I see is I feel that fitness and just mental health is getting combined into this whole category of just general wellness, right? And you hear that very often. It's not fitness. It's not, you don't take a fitness class. It's a wellness class, right? And I don't know, sometimes I think about this, if it's a good thing, that the fact that those category lines are blurred, does that make the whole conversation about mental health easier, right? Or does it basically numb it a little bit?
I actually want to answer that, and then maybe I'll tie in at the end when everyone's done with this question, and I'll summarize. But I think the idea of wellness, and subsequently to the idea of the U.S. Open adopting mental health services, I think it's better for marketing. Like because I'm considering the marketing side of. Because mental health is under the realm of public health, and we hear about marketing campaigns in public health all the time. How do we get people to adopt healthier lifestyles and habits, et cetera, et cetera? And so, to me, I see both sides to your question, right? I see both sides to your question, or to your, I guess, rhetorical question almost, where it would be better for it to be specialized. I think for sure, but I think for the next however many years, like that's the lead in, like that's the appetizer that's more palatable, so we can get to the entree that might not be as cool or delicious, but it's what we really, really need. Like we really need our Brussels sprouts, but it's a lot easier when we have those loaded potato skins on the way in. I don't know, I'm just making this up, but like, so we need I think we need that lead in for marketing at the moment until it's easier to talk about. And I think for me, the US Open, to kind of come back to this part of the question, is just, I think it's necessary. I think hopefully the domino effect, I like tennis. I'm going to say it's a cool sport, but like cooler sports, like, like badminton. No, but like NFL or NBA and stuff like that, because I end up working a lot with youth. Like I give a lot of talks and education and workshops to both parents, educators, and students. And so I offer role models in music, and I offer role models in sports. They're some of the easier places to go to say, hey, Kevin Love in the NBA is talking about his mental health. Kid Cudi, not that he's an artist. Dak Prescott talked about his brother's death by suicide. This, female, trans, you kind of get to bring in the whole. But it's like, okay, if they're doing it, they're at the top of their sport, then I'm gonna maybe start paying attention in mine. So it's one of many tools, but that's where I see the U.S. Open sort of playing a role in broader society. We haven't heard from Jeremy Greenberg in a while, and I want to hear from F too. Anyone on the spot who doesn't want to talk.
I mean,
Josh.
I will say you brought up something interesting, right? You talk about Dak Prescott, you talk about Kevin Love. Robin Lehner he was of the Vegas Golden Knights, has been very public with his, sort of dealing with bipolar. Those are all men in top 4 sports in the United States who have been very open and honest with their mental health. However, those aren't the people we led this conversation with. We led our conversation with Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, 2 very strong, powerful female athletes who have been very open and honest about their mental health. And I'm curious, and I don't want to steal your job as the host here, Josh, but I'm curious from anyone else on the panel, if they have any insights of why it is they feel like that it's these 2 women stepping up and being vulnerable and honest that have kind of changed the situation maybe a little bit more in the athletics world compared to it being some of the male traditional male athletes from the traditional sports who have been honest, that have kind of been pushing this conversation.
I mean, I'll take that one. I don't know that anyone, I just happen to give arbitrary examples. So there was no intentionality around male, female, or anything like that. And I think it was also partly too to sort of bring some balance. I would just say they're in the right place at the right time at this very moment. Simone happened to be, this is a worldwide thing, right? So, NBA is United States. I mean, there's some popularity in China, Africa, the continent, and things like that. But this is a world stage, and the U.S. as a whole is probably watching that more than they're oh, I can't wait to watch another hockey game again. Which is, I like hockey, but it's hockey. Come on.
I mean, let's be honest that Kevin Love is not LeBron James.
Right.
Dak Prescott is not Tom Brady. And if Simone Biles is arguably the best gymnast ever, and Naomi Osaka is one of the top 3 tennis players in the world and won the U.S. Open last year. So it's a prominence thing, I think, largely. I do think that a lot of the negative views towards both of those women, there was an era of sexism and there's a gendered component to it. But I think historically, it's been actually much harder for men in those situations to come out or to talk about mental health concerns that they have. One just quick note I want to say, just bring it back to the workplace, is I joined DraftKings, which is a company that does daily fantasy sports and sports book betting, and we just launched an NFT marketplace. And actually, last week, Naomi Osaka was the main person we focused on, and Simone Biles will be in the next couple of weeks. But and by the way, we had Tom Brady, and then we had Wayne Gretzky, and then we had Naomi Osaka, and this week is Derek Jeter. So that's the type of level that she's in. But what I will say is I was out of the corporate world for about 8 years before this job. So I was doing startup entrepreneurial stuff, working for small companies. And coming in at the beginning of the year in 2021, I was blown away coming into a company that I thought would be very bro-y in nature, very male dominated, very sports centric. I was blown away at how many support systems there are in terms of mental health. I think it's a little bit like an analog around big data. Lots of companies, the last 10 years have been like, oh, it's all about big data. I've got to have lots of data on my customers. And some companies don't really know what to do with it. Similar when social media started, they didn't know exactly how to deal with it. And I think mental health is another thing where it's like the companies know that there's something that needs to be done. So my company, for example, was very, I think, open about Mental Awareness Month, and has lots of programs related to like diversity and inclusion. And we have a pretty open dialogue, a surprisingly open dialogue around mental health in my team. And I was just surprised. So I'm kind of curious if that's an anomaly for my company, if the rest of the industries have, you all have seen some of that, whether it's, authentic lip service or just, investing, whatever it is. To me, like, just being out of it for 8 years and coming back into it, I saw a pronounced difference in just terms of like reduction of toxicity and, emphasis on mental health as being something critical to someone's job.
I think to answer that question there before completely, I would need a lot more time, and I don't think we want to be here till 3 a.m. But just very, very quickly, I'm going to try to give a quick answer, which we can talk more about offline or maybe in a future episode. But I think that the answer to both, in my opinion, both Josh W.'s question and Jeremy's question is that diversity has been very, very good for everybody, including someone like me who is a straight cis white male. I think that is one of the reasons why the workplace of today looks a lot less like the workplace that was described in Liar's Poker when about the time that I started working. I think that the more diversity we have, the less it's been, to use your word, Jeremy, broy. I would say broy is actually a very generous word for what it used to be like. It used to be like a fraternity house that was hazing everybody, except the people that were up top who basically just hazed everybody. It's a lot less than that now. I think it's a lot less like that now, even though we still have ways to go. And I think that's been good for everybody, even for people who may check a lot of the privilege boxes.
Yeah, I guess I would say I want to answer this briefly as well, and then we are at our self-imposed time. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly kind of give a thought on this, and then what I want to do is have everyone in alphabetical order who's a guest, and then give a final thought, sort of a recap, maybe no more than a minute. Just whatever you want people to take away with, and then F will go, I'll go, we'll close it down, and we'll thank our watchers, listeners. Jerry, I think it probably has to do somewhat with the industry that you're in as well. I know there's still some typically, without calling any industry out, but I think there are some typically bro-y industries. But like, I think from doing this work, like doing this with Efrem, and then being privileged to be integrated in diverse environments by this very nature of this work, plus the work that I do as a solo practitioner, I think the diversity is of what we're seeing is growing, and I think it's nothing but beneficial. But there's lots of work to do, individually and collectively as well. So I want to, we'll go. This has been awesome. Like, I feel like I need maybe a bite to eat, maybe, but like I could probably go for like another hour or two, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we're already going over for our guests, and that's who I really want to be mindful of. So we'll go Elana, we'll go JKA, we'll go Jeremy, Joanna, J-Dubs, Lynette. You like that, Josh? J-Dubs, yeah. That's where you are on my screen. I'm pointing up to you. And then we'll go Efrem, and then we'll go Josh R. So Elana, like whatever you want to share, just like, something to summarize, something you're hopeful about, something that you want people to take away.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been thinking since we started talking about this meditation teacher named George Mumford. I don't know if anybody knows who he is, but he worked with the likes of Michael Jordan. And Kobe Bryant, so people that we've like a little bit referenced, and he's the author of this book called The Mindful Athlete, and his whole take on his work is bringing mindfulness to performance. And so it's really it's not officially, like, he's not a psychologist, but he's doing that work through mindfulness, and really having listened to some of his teachings, so to speak, it's really powerful for people in like whatever workplace setting to be like getting your head in the game. And that's sort of I think the connection that I've made from his work to, which is, focused on athletes, to all of our work, which is about, in one way or another, performance. So I'll send a link or something that we can put in if people want to look. But thank you. This has been a blast with all of you. So thanks for being here. And
thanks, Elana. Appreciate you and your words and your work. I will definitely be looking up that author as well, because that's meaningful, important. Jeremy, next in the alphabet.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really an honor to be here with all of you. Elana, it was awesome to learn from you and your article. So thank you so much for sharing that, and everyone else for your expertise and insights and hypotheses. I mean, a lot of this we don't really know, right? We're just kind of speculating. I think one question that I had but I think it's been answered throughout this discussion is, like, why are we even talking about this, right? Because I think, there are some people who maybe on this call or listening or watching who are not actually sports fans. So it's like, well, why should I really care about this? So I think there are a couple of reasons. One is, like, sports is a microcosm for life, right? So like often, we use this all the time. There's no I in team, and, practicing, the value of practice, the value of going to battle, so to speak, and going through that journey. So I think it's a microcosm. It's also a microcosm where there's a huge, spotlight on it. These are athletes that are under a lot of pressure and so forth. So I think there are a lot of reasons for why we talked about this topic. I think in particular, one of the ironies about sports, I believe, is that sports fundamentally is about two things: numbers and stories. So when you think about people who are into sports, like, they're often talking about records and how much people scored and percentages and so forth. And the second thing that really moves people is around the stories. So it's kind of just interesting that what we do is we really are getting value as consumers of sports from stories. And that is in and of itself an emotional experience. It's not like it is not rational. It is not, logically rational to spend thousands of dollars on a ticket to a game, or to spend 8 hours watching a sport or two teams win, where it really doesn't actually matter who wins, but you really, really support an athlete or a team or whatever. So there's actually nothing rational about sports when you think about it. So when you think about it that way, it actually is about emotion and about stories, and it's just kind of ironic that in an industry that is about emotion and stories and, in essence, mental health, really at the crux of it, and the stories that really get us most excited are things about, the underdog, or people falling from grace, and people going back and forth, or, Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson. Like, this is not about logic, this is about emotion. And it's just ironic that in a field like that, we aren't yet at a place where we can talk, openly, or most athletes can feel like they can talk about their emotions. But just wanted to make that point. And then also just the point that, just coming back into the corporate world, I am optimistic about where things are going. And I think similar to other situations, like, more of an acceptance, not a complete acceptance, but more of an acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community. It's percolating and it's happening, and I think good progress is on the horizon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeremy Greenberg. Really, really great words to wrap things up on your end. Really enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Josh Walfish, grace us with some final words, please.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of pressure putting it like that. But no, I mean, I when I look at sports, I think the major trend is the power of the athlete, and we're seeing it in the NBA, we're seeing it in the NFL, where the athlete is really taking control of their life. And kind of breaking off of what Jeremy said, like sports is a microcosm of life, and what we're seeing is that sports is building off of what we're seeing right now in this country. You mentioned the great quit earlier, and the fact that people are like, listen, like if my working conditions aren't good enough, I'm just not going to work here. And I think we're seeing athletes really kind of take control of that sort of messaging and saying, listen, like you haven't given me all of the tools I need to be successful, so I'm not going to play for you anymore. And if you don't want to pay me what I'm worth, then I'm just not going to play anymore, and I'm okay just walking away. And I think we're seeing that same thing with mental health and saying, listen, like I don't care what you're paying me, I don't care what you think my job is, like I'm not okay mentally, I'm just not going to play. I'm going to step away from this because I understand inherently sports is just a game. And I had a second point and I completely lost it there. And so like that for me is sort of, why we're talking about this is because athletes have forced our hands. And we have seen over the past decade or so where mental health has become a larger conversation in this country. And now athletes are like, you know what, it needs to be a larger conversation in sports. And they've really forced the issue with us. And now that I remember my second point, I want to go back to maybe a comment that Efrem knows well, which is the famous Allen Iverson practice ring. And people remember him saying, it's just that we're talking about practice, not the game, it's practice. What people forget about is the question that prompted that rant was about Iverson missing practice to deal with the death of a friend and going to the funeral. That question, we asked sort of earlier, what sort of changes? That question would not get asked nowadays. No one would dare question an athlete for going to the funeral of a friend or a family member and missing practice. But 20 years ago, that's a question, and we have now this wonderful, viral moment that came of it. And I just think about the fact that is, a microcosm of the fact that the athlete is taking power and really driving the conversations where they need to be, and making sure that we remember they are human and that they have the same problems in their workplace as everyone else has in their workplace. They just do it on a little bit more of a public forum than those of us in the corporate world.
Thank you, Josh. Glad to have you on the show. And thanks for that Iverson context. I didn't know that, but I know that very iconic practice. Yeah, it's great. I'm the worst with my alphabet because Joanna should have gone and then Josh, but I'm learning my letters, you guys. I'm working on it. Joanna, I'm so glad you've been on the show. Thank you. And please, whatever you have to tell us, please and thank you.
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you guys. I feel that this has been a great conversation with a group of people that really care about the subject, right? And I mean, I'd like to say that I hope this conversation continues, whether it's with all of us internally or all of us externally. I think it's very important to continue to have this conversation. And not only about the conversation about mental health, but how it correlates with fitness. I'm a strong believer that there's an athlete in all of us, right? And I don't care if you spend 10 minutes walking a week, right? Or if you're getting your face punched in a boxing ring, you're an athlete, right? You don't have to be paid in order to be an athlete. And I'd like to just end off with something that my coach has taught me long ago. And it's something that I try to think of quite often. And that's fitness is not what you see, but it's what you feel.
That's awesome. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you.
Glad you were here. I'm getting better with my letters. So Lynette, you're next. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate, being invited here. It's an honor to be here with all of you, and just part of this conversation. And I think that going back to the why are we talking about this? I think it's incredibly important. Obviously, I'm not a specialist in the field specifically when it comes to psychology, but I do think that there's pause. And one of the biggest things too that actually is part of like how do you continue this conversation is what comes after being the professional athlete. And there's so much transition that happens there. And the psychologists, I'm not psychologist, but the psychology behind the transitioning even, we find that there's a huge gap there. And I hope that, and I think that it's being filled in some ways, but the sooner I think that there's some sort of acceptance or adoption, perhaps, that transition becomes a bit more prepared for in some way. And I'm not being fairly articulate here, but the idea here is that the actor, right? So we're talking about, being the athlete right now. And then, well, when I leave the sport, when I'm leaving this and everything that goes into living a life and becoming part of society in a different way. I think that's an interesting question. I loved being here. So many fun things, so many fun takeaways that we can continue.
Thanks again, Lynette. Appreciate it. I think part of that what you were describing, I think, is change management, right? Like how we honor transitions and like the psychology of that. Like that's such an important point. And that's totally another episode, but it's a big conversation. And I think it's usually tied into like industrial and organizational psychology, as opposed to like the therapeutic side of counseling or the therapeutic side of psychology. But it's really important because the twain do meet, right? And so I think that's really important. So thanks for bringing that up and for your presence. Over to my delightful co-host, Efrem Epstein.
Oh, I knew you were gonna bring that in. Gosh, there's so much I want to say. There's so much buzzing around my head right now that, but I've got to edit myself, save the stuff for another show because I don't think people want to hear me talk to 4 a.m. But I just, I think a good way to summarize an observation, Josh, is that this is our 12th episode, and I think before we do every episode, we have the same two concerns. Number one is that, do we have enough questions to basically fill 60 minutes, or tonight it was roughly about 90 minutes. So we had to put more, we had to do more there. And the other thing also is that after 12 episodes, after 10 episodes, 11 episodes, 12 episodes, has the conversation, I don't want to say gone stale, but how much can you really talk about mental health in the workplace? Is there enough to talk about every single time? And the answer to each of those questions is always, we never get to all the questions that we draft. And also we always seem to have new conversations that we have to cut off because we're running out of time. So I think that really tells me two things. One is that we're constantly getting awesome guests on our show because the guests are the one things that keep making it different. And I don't think that we've had a bad conversation yet. As a matter of fact, I don't think we've had a conversation I would make that I would rank less than amazing yet. And this one was a super amazing conversation. And the other takeaway from that is that, yeah, this is mental health in the workplace, mental health in basically any workplace, but including the athlete's workplace, is a very important conversation. And yeah, we should be talking about it because you can see here, we didn't have enough time to talk about everything we want to talk about. So that means we just got to keep on having more conversations. And if you're watching, that means that there are more conversations to be had. So please have them.
Yeah. Thanks, F. Agreed on all points. especially good guests, great guests. Something came up when I just want to summarize and then we'll take off. Just this idea of performance, like the sports psychologist is about performance, right? And I realized that for a lot of people, like they look at their life, and we talked about story, and stories are important, and what the athlete is doing with their numbers and their story, those are important too, and that's why we sort of glom onto that. So I realized that for many, talking about mental health and maybe even this idea of I need to dig deep and dig out these emotional issues and the things that are holding me back, that might be scary and that might be painful and that might be daunting, right? So what if we thought about it in sort of the idea as a lead-in, right? An easier way to dive in to what we want to do in life, and maybe that involves psychology counseling from a performance standpoint. Like, so I want to get incrementally better in this particular relationship, or I want to get incrementally better in how I talk about food or about finances, right? So there's all these different places where we might want to get better, we can do healthier, do differently. And maybe we could save some of those harder, deeper, traumatic conversations for another time, but let's have that easier lead in, right? So maybe that's my takeaway is maybe we can start talking about mental health from a performance standpoint, so that it's easier to talk about it on a more distilled, in a more distilled manner down the road. You know, it's we all need an easy lead into some difficult things in our lives, and this might be one of those things, right? So incredibly grateful to have this massive conversation with some really interesting and tremendous people. So I want to thank our guests. We'll call you the Fab Five for tonight. And want to thank my host. And I want to thank everyone who's taken time out of their night to listen, to watch. These are important conversations, and I hope we're doing it justice, and we hope we're doing you justice. I'm Josh Rivedal for Efrem Epstein, Cubicle Lift, an honest conversation on workplace mental health. Thank you so much, and see you next time.